So thank you everyone for being back today for a very exciting core concept session. Today we're going to be talking about Genies, next generation AI agents. The session is going to run from 4 to 5 p.m. and roughly the structure is going to be as follows. We'll have a brief introduction now, and after that we'll have a presentation by Professor van der Schaar on her vision for Genies. And then we'll have a panel discussion with two recurring faces on revolutionizing healthcare, who we'll introduce in just a minute. And throughout the session, please do feel free to ask any questions that you may have in the chat, and we're going to answer as many as possible. And with agentic AI and Genies being a really hot topic, please feel free to also ask questions that may seem stupid to you or whatever. We're really happy to answer any questions you may have. So I'm really excited that we're going to be joined today by two fantastic panelists who have been on Revolutionizing Healthcare before. The first one is Professor Owen McKinney, who has the Versus Arthritis Chair of Rheumatology and is an honorary consultant in nephrology and transplantation at Cambridge University Hospitals and a faculty member at CCIM. And we're also really happy to be joined by another faculty member of CCIM, Professor Richard Peck, who's an honorary professor of pharmacology and therapeutics at Liverpool University and is the former global head of clinical pharmacology at Roche. Thank you so much for being here today. And without further ado, let me hand this over to Mihaela for her starting presentation.
Thank you very much, Tim, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. Also, huge thanks to Anne and Richard for trying to really bring this vision of Genies forward. So, can you see my slides well, Tim?
Yes, brilliant. Thank you.
Fantastic. So, before I start and talk about Genies, I wanted to tell you what is the plan for my presentation. I'd like to differentiate AI agents, large language models-based agents, from more conventional chatbots that you are already using today. Then I'm going to introduce kind of the next level, if you like, in the hierarchy, this concept of genies, which I've introduced relatively recently, and tell you what they are and why I believe that we need to go to this next level in this progression from LLM agents to genies. I will then give an example of how the future could look like in which clinicians are empowered by such genies and contrast how this looks like as opposed to LLM agents. And finally, I'm going to end with a call to action to you, the revolutionary clinicians, to help us envision this future such that the machine learning community can co-create such genies together with you and empower you. So what are really LLM agents? They are going beyond text generation, so beyond the current ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini, which you are using. And they are large language models that can act. So the focus is on action. So while the large language models predict text based on the prompt that you are giving, LLM agents are systems that go one step further, that have context management, they have the ability to do decisions such as planning and goal setting, and finally act. So if you think about this large language model agent loop, they are enabling, these agents are querying the large language model with a prompt that includes not only instructions, but also memory and goals for the agents. They also have reasoning, which enables the large language model to generate a chain of thought considering multiple steps and potentially, if the task that's given to the agent is complicated, multiple subtasks. Then the agent can execute different types of actions on the basis of feedback that the agent receives, either on the basis of a human that provides this feedback or by them interacting with the real world. The agent will update its memory and context with the results of the action and improve. And that leads to an iterative cycle where the agent is going to improve their actions as well as reasoning capabilities, all the way to a moment when the goal is either reached or some type of stopping criteria, a certain amount of time or delay has been met. So the key takeaway is that large language models currently are somewhat passive, but if it is to think about agents and an LLM-based agents, they are no longer passive. They are actively pursuing objectives. So again, a difference between large language models, the way we know them today in the form of ChatGPT or Claude, and the large language model agent. And you can see there this difference between the two of them, for instance, in terms of goals. For the large language model, it's implied by the prompt which the user gives. On the other hand, in the case of an LLM agent, we have explicit tasks and goals, and these are potentially decomposed in sub-goals. In terms of autonomy, the large language models are user-driven queries, which are just providing information and responses to these queries. While in the large language model case, this could be an action or a goal that's given by a human, but then they are self-directed actions which lead to an iterative multi-turn process on the basis of which the large language model responds to this goal. So the key takeaway is that while a large language model is a powerful text predictor, a large language model agent is really much further in its ability because it's able to leverage large language model prowess to plan, but also execute tasks, reason, and adapt in real time. So LLM agents are nowadays proliferating, whether it is for doing research and data analysis, whether it is in writing code, whether it is creating personal assistants, for instance, for scheduling tasks or ordering your groceries, and in the area of medicine, potentially planning your schedule or orchestrating daily tasks, but also continuous monitoring and adaptation. You can have agents that can monitor something, for instance, sensor data of a patient, and act accordingly without user prompts. I'm going to give you two examples of LLM agents before I move to Genies. One where we have built an agent to be able to discover pharmacological models from data. And this is work with my PhD students, Sam, Zhaoji, and Tennyson, and our collaborator, Jim Wetherell from AstraZeneca. And what we did here, we built an agent that goes through a series of steps highlighted here, given a particular task to create a pharmacological model from data. It goes through modeling, evaluation, as well as several reasoning steps to be able to build these pharmacological models. So this is no longer your ChatGPT or your conventional large language model, but rather an agent that passes through a set of tasks and subtasks to do the discovery of a pharmacological model on the basis of data. So what it's achieved at the end, we are discovering using this agent a pharmacokinetic model that's highlighted here. So this agent goal was to discover on the basis of warfarin data a pharmacological model. This is what it discovered. And then we can take this discovery and compare it with what we have had before. Another example is in terms of digital twins. Often we discussed in Revolutionizing Healthcare the need to build digital twins for healthcare. This is another example which comes from another strand of work done with my PhD students Sam and Tennyson, where we have built a digital twin of a patient that again uses an agent with several steps where the goal is to use data to build a digital twin. Then there is a modeling step, an optimization step, an evaluation step, a reasoning step, and this cycle is iterated all the way till we build a digital twin of a cohort of patients. Now, these are examples of what agents can do today. So this seems quite powerful. So why do we need to go to the next level? What are genies? Genies are, if you like, sophisticated and multi-capable AI companions. They are no longer just a low-level support agent, but rather they are becoming companions that together with a human can generate ideas, they can plan, they can reason much more adaptively and proactively and continuously learn. And the role is not to replace the human, but the role is to amplify the human potential. And I'm going to try to illustrate that in a few examples. So ideally, what we would like to do is to build such genies that are co-evolving together with their human owner. They are collaborating, they are enhancing trust, and they are doing much more than just automation. Automation of boring tasks, clearly this is the task of agents, building schedules, dealing with low-level information. What we are talking in Genies is kind of the next evolutionary stage where humans and machine can become partners with each other and can evolve to the next level. And there will be 5 steps that this Genies will encompass: innovation, planning and execution, which I call operation, validation, because we need to make sure that these genies are able to rigorously reason and test whatever they propose to the human. Evolution, and here the evolution is both in terms of the ability of these genies to learn, but also their ability to communicate with their human owner, with other humans, or with other genies. So something that currently we do not see in the current agentic framework, but which genies should be able to do. So high quality, transparent communication and the ability to evolve the communication and the learning capability. And last, but actually the most important part, is making sure that these genies are human empowering, and in the clinical case, empowering for the clinicians, and why not the patients. And these 5 cycles will need to kind of interact into a continuous self-improving cycle where every step, whether it is innovation, whether it is evolution, whether it's planning, are interacting with each other and adapting over time. Okay, if you want to read more about this, I put actually a little discussion document. This discussion document is mainly aimed at the ML community and the challenges we face as a machine learning community to build such agents. But at the very end of the page, there is an example on how a clinician in the future would be able to operate if they have at their availability such a genie. And this agenda of genie creation is a step forward in our reality-centric AI agenda, in building AI that is human empowering. So let me give the example of this AI-empowered clinician. And I want to start by thanking to Richard Peck and Tim Schubert for advising me on this example. And I'm going to go through this example to show to you what we believe could be a potential future, not because this needs to be the only one or the correct one, but just to inspire you. And I want to tell you that the animations that I created here were created together with the visualization of ChatGPT. So if you are amused or appalled by them, this is how these images were created. So Dr. Maya Alvarez, who appears here in this image, begins her morning by reviewing cases with her personalized genie, Evita. Evita is, though, much more than an electronic assistant. It has grown alongside Dr. Maya's clinical expertise, adapting to her unique decision-making style and expanding her capabilities in public health leadership in Latin America, where Maya is practicing. And together, they address not only individual patient scenario, but also broader systemic health challenges that extend beyond conventional medical practices in a resource-constrained environment where Maya is active. Now, that morning, Maya encountered a patient exhibiting a perplexing combination of symptoms: erratic neurological deficits, unexplained cardiac rhythm anomalies, and prolonged fatigue. And this is an unusual combination with no clear diagnosis. So Maya is faced with a challenge. To explore possible causes, she instructs Evita, her genie, to scan a broad range of data sources, including latest genomic studies, environmental health records, emerging case reports. Evita then leverages the network of Genies, so Genies of other researchers and other organizations around the globe, and accesses a diverse array of data sources. And in real time, she gathered insights from the specialized genies dedicated to such atypical infectious scenarios or environmental toxins. And Evita not only gathers this information, but quickly organizes this information, flagging potential environmental and infectious factors that might be relevant for Maya. So you see here Evita generating and innovating the right, trying to scout for the right sources of information, trying to reason about these sources, to flag the right information to Maya, and also communicating with other genies as well as with Maya herself. Now, based on this information that's provided by Evita, Maya formulates key research questions to guide further inquiry. Instead of relying solely on existing medical protocols, because this case is quite different, she asks, could an emerging infectious agent be responsible for these cardiac irregularities? And what environmental factors might be contributed to the patient's neurological symptoms? Evita gets this question and assists by running preliminary analysis and comparing similar cases across the Genie network to help refine the hypothesis for Maya. Maya then considers the different evidence and identifies a potential link between the patient's unique genomic markers and the atypical infectious agents or environmental toxins present in the local area. This insight is drawn from newly emerging data sets within the international Genie network, and the information was specifically curated by Evita to support Maya's quest. Now, Maya asks then Evita to help with validating this hypothesis that she narrowed down. And for this, Evita needs to coordinate a collaborative session with genies in microbiology, toxicology, neurology, and cardiology. So it's a conference, a mini conference of genies. Though through seamless interaction within this Genie network, where specialized genies share their insights, refining the hypothesis by incorporating a variety of global data and environmental patterns, information is gathered, and Maya is involved and participates and steers this discussion, posing complex critical questions, synthesizes the different inputs she's getting from the collection of genies, and enhances the answers that are received and steers the discussion. This collaborative effort of genies and humans integrate cross-domain knowledge, enhancing the accuracy and reliability of the hypothesis and diagnostic process. Now, recognizing the need for a multifaceted approach, Maya asked Evita to devise a comprehensive plan, organizing targeted toxicological assays for the patient, and initiating a multi-case review to assess the prevalence of the proposed syndrome and evaluating potential therapeutic agents by discussing with pharmacological genies. Maya approves the plan developed by Evita and oversees its execution. Maya also actively monitors the progress, adjusting the focus based on preliminary findings and real-time information from Evita and the other participating supporting genies. As the patient's condition deteriorates overnight, Maya dynamically reallocates resources, shifting focus from research to urgent clinical intervention. And Evita collaborates with toxicology toxicology Genies, to prioritize lab analysis and adjust the treatment protocol based on the latest clinical data. However, Maya always remains in control and at the helm, making informed decisions based on Evita's comprehensive support and real-time updates. And she asks critical questions such as, should we initiate broad-spectrum antimicrobial therapy immediately, or shall we wait? Based on the information received, Maya believes now that the case requires immediate multidisciplinary intervention and instructs Evita to coordinate an emergency joint consultation, this time with human specialists in neurology, cardiology, and infectious diseases. Evita quickly connects with the genies of the specialists, who in turn prepare tailored briefings from their respective clinicians. The neurology genie, in collaboration with the neurologist, summarizes the neurological manifestations, comparing this with similar cases flagged. The cardiology genie highlights potential cardiac risks and recommends urgent tests based on recent research. By the time the human clinicians convene for the consultation, they each have a concise, focused report from their own genies and from the discussions of genies that distills the most relevant information for their specialty. And this preparation accelerates the decision-making process of the very busy clinicians, allowing them to swiftly align on a shared treatment plan, optimizing the patient's care. You see here some of the key aspects of the genie. Throughout these developments, Evita's systematic reasoning and validation process are important. It cross-references existing research and provides new evidence. And when conflicting information arises, Evita identifies discrepancies and proposes to Maya targeted inquiries, such as additional data collection or consultations with other genies in other countries or in other regions, and maintains the integrity of the investigative process. Maya actively engages with these suggestions, but also steers these efforts. Moreover, Evita leverages the collective intelligence of the Genie network to facilitate large-scale studies and inform policy initiatives. By aggregating data from multiple genies and clinical sites, Evita helps Maya lead a preliminary study that highlights the correlation between the emerging infectious agent prevalence, genetics, and resistant data. Now, this collaborative effort not only stabilizes the patient's condition, but also informs local policymakers. At the very end, by the month's end, the patient condition stabilizes and the collaborative effort facilitated by the Genie network yield actionable insights that have the potential to reshape public health policies. And Maya reflects on how Evita, supported by the network's collaborative infrastructure of genies and humans, has elevated her own role as both a clinician as well as a community leader in the global south. Together, Genie, Evita, and Maya, the clinician, have navigated complex multi-domain challenges, setting a new standard for AI-assisted healthcare and illustrating the profound impact which genies operating with humans can have. This partnership not only enhances patient outcomes, but also accelerates the local healthcare's ability to respond to emergent health threats, thereby bridging the gap between the global north and south in medical expertise as well as resources. Now, I presented to you an example as an AI-empowered clinician, but you can see this type of empowerment happening in other settings where expertise is required. For instance, AI-empowered or a Genie-empowered business leader. As I mentioned, the core capabilities of genies are their ability to generate and innovate, plan, and I'm thinking here about planning at the next level, where they are orchestrating complex multi-layer strategies across long-term goals and across interconnected domains. The ability to act under human supervision to implement such plans, And also the ability of genies to reason and validate the ideas, plans, and actions put forward to the human, such that these are robust, credible, and aligned with real-world constraints and guidelines. Importantly, genies must also transcend conventional transparency and interpretability by engaging in dynamic context-aware communication that adapts depending on the different users and level of expertise. And these genies must also effectively communicate with other genies as well as the humans, ensuring that their communication serves multiple critical functions, such as the ability to facilitate knowledge exchange, to uncover new information, and enhance creativity of the human as well as network ecosystem. For that, genies also must be lifelong learners. They need to assimilate new information, feedback from their human users, and evolve over time. And finally, and essentially, these genies must empower humans, and they need to help humans get and achieve new heights, paving the way for co-creation, co-reasoning, co-acting that neither humans alone or genius alone can achieve. In the agenda that I put forward online, there is a long pathway in terms of machine learning to be able to build such genies. So this is not something that you can have access today, but it's something that we are working on as an AI community. And I try to convince the AI community that we need to orient ourselves towards this key technology and key questions. And many of these questions are as complex as doing an entire PhD thesis in machine learning. So some of them may take years to solve. But if we are able to do that, we will advance beyond current agents. We are going to be able to, again, bring the focus towards better learning, better reasoning, as well as enhancing human creativity. So the reason I think that we should be excited, and I hope that you, the clinicians, are going to be excited, is that we have now the opportunity to build such technology and such genies that you own, that are your own, but also some that are going to be associated with your organization, your clinic, your healthcare ecosystem. And if we are building such genies correctly, we can shape the future of human AI collaboration and build partnerships that can advance healthcare, whether it's in the scientific domain, whether it's in the way these genies are going to help us be up to date with discoveries, or in providing care. And again, this is not a one-time process, but human and genie could co-evolve together. And again, I think that this could be impactful both in delivering care, but also improving your career, your health, your creative pursuits. So a call to action, and the reason I found important to have this session and think together, not only with the two friends, Richard and Earl, but also with all of you, is I think we need to have as a community a view as to what type of genies we should be building. What do you find empowering? What do you find useful? The focus here is not replacement, but rather elevation of human potential. And ideally, these genies shouldn't be just chatbots like we have today in the form of ChatGPT, but rather true intelligent collaborators that can help us think, reason, co-create. And I think that what we must do is to envision what these capabilities would be. And this is why I organized the session today. And I really hope that you will participate and help us think out of the box about such genies. Thank you. Maybe in view of time, I can directly jump and ask you, and you, Richard, do you think we should build such genies? And if we do, what capabilities they should have? What do you think are more important capabilities than others? And importantly, how do you envision that this future could look like? And what are you excited about? And what's your vision about the future empowered by Genies? Oh, and shall I start with you and then Richard?
Many thanks, Mihaela. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. I mean, first of all, it's an incredible vision, and I think it's tough to restrain the number of potential contexts down to just 101, right? I mean, if this becomes feasible, and it's not to say that it is currently feasible to do everything we're talking about, if it becomes feasible, it could be, completely transformative. There are obviously as many challenges as there are opportunities here, but in terms of focusing on the opportunities, first of all, distributed expertise, being able to supplement, not replace, but supplement and synergize with existing MDTs. Because the case that you outlined with Maya, I did 3 days ago with 4 other consultant level clinicians with a difficult case where we had to come together, decide what to do for a patient. And that relied on us all having read the right background, having all got the right knowledge to come to a consensus decision on what to do. And I think that that couldn't be replaced with a genie, but it could unquestionably be improved by the presence of a genie. But a lot of what you're talking about for genies is individual, where an individual genie could support an individual clinician and effectively grow and train with that individual. And that could be enormously powerful, particularly if they're able to use it as a sounding board, if they're able to use it as a way of challenging their own way of thinking. And consequently, I would see the most potential for genies in not thinking for us and not doing what LLMs can do, which is just giving us an answer, which, as someone's pointed out in the questions, we're not quite at the point where there is the metacognitive reasoning ability to do that. But instead of thinking for us, helping us to think. So where I think I've arrived at a certain viewpoint, being challenged on that is enormously productive. That's what you get best when you have academic or clinical meetings. And Genies, I think, could facilitate that process in a very helpful way. Having done so, they could facilitate distributing that expertise, because the sorts of MDTs that we have to come to consensus clinical decisions require experts to come together. But it's very difficult to then have regional, national MDTs for particular challenging cases. But if there are genies that people can interact with, someone could, for example, involve another expert's genie in their MDT and effectively have expert input. So there's huge potential here. You can obviously also tell from the scenarios I'm outlining, there's potential difficulty with regulation as well. How do you know? How are you able to trust those things? And I think for me, before you even get to that point, you need to think about how you can actually test the impact of a genie. And I think the agent-based example you gave with warfarin and your PK model is quite clear cut. There is a known structure here. Are you able to discover one that might be better and compare it back to an existing gold standard? Knowing how or what the impact of a broad sense intelligent reasoning genie might be, where it's taking on multiple tasks and giving feedback or input in multiple contexts. That's not a simple p equals less than 0.05 answer to one question. So it's hard to assess their impact, and consequently hard to implement, hard to demonstrate what their impact is, hard to fund them, and hard to regulate them. So whilst they've got huge potential, there are enormous challenges, first of all, but I don't think that's a
Sorry
reason
to
to
jump. Let me ask you something, because not to forget, do you envision that maybe regulators or clinical bodies could have their own genies to help with governance, or is that a crazy idea?
I think it's an obvious next step, but it's opening a Pandora's box, because if you have the regulators running their own genies, who's watching the watchmen, right? It's difficult to have genies policing genies. That system is even more open to manipulation and lack of trust and an attack. So I think we'll have to proceed incrementally in order to gain trust. But actually, one of the things I quite liked about your presentation, well, one of the things was that you put forward a structure of iterative loops. So actually, genies aren't where it's not that your genie turns up on day one and provides all given answers, after you've rubbed the lamp 3 times. What you're actually dealing with are iterative loops of reasoning where you're getting feedback potentially from simpler contexts building up to more difficult ones. And that sort of iterative looping is a context in which you can gain trust. And if the outputs are more clear cut and quantifiable, where actually you could build gradually a context where you have a genie that's both useful and controlled and regulated. One other context I would mention in terms of specifically in terms of its use isn't just distributed expertise in terms of MDTs, but is medical education. And I know someone mentioned in the chat, isn't this going to de-skill us all? It could, but if we use it properly, then it could do exactly the opposite. If we're using this as a sounding board to help us think, then actually I think this could improve medical education. It could democratize medical education. It could allow us to distribute medical education, and it could make us think better. If we use it as a source of answers, then yes, then I think will end up in a sticky place. And I worry that's what people do. The human response is to use LLMs to give them the answer, not to challenge themselves and make themselves think.
Well, one could, on that point, one could see them as coaches who can, whether it's medicine or any other area where there is expertise, to point to us about new findings, new resources that become available, things that are pertinent to us. So they could indeed be coaches for us through our lifetime. Richard.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd love to have one. I'd love to have one in our lab meeting. I'd love to have one at conferences where it's actually challenging us. You could see how that would work. And
Saying
it doesn't
go to this paper, or one
yeah,
could say go to this paper. You shouldn't miss it. Yeah, fantastic. Richard, what about more any comment, but also in the area of clinical trials, dealing with drugs, being able to support us in selecting the right drugs?
Thank you. Again, I think it's an astonishing concept. I mean, and I have a lot of questions that, I hope at some point we get to discuss. Doesn't have to be in the next, whatever we've got, 20 minutes, but to pick up and build on a couple of things Owen's already said. I mean, I think it's critical to really see the genies as enablers, the empowering, the enabler, not replacing, not de-skilling, because I think it's still important that the clinician has accountability for the decision. The genie becomes something that helps him or her make better decisions in the future. That will certainly have an impact, by the way, on the regulatory demand that is being made. Of course, there'll need to be the quality systems, but within the genie, such that you're confident that it's not making things up. A challenge we all know about with things like ChatGPT, but other aspects of the regulatory demand go down if the accountability is still very clearly on the physician. But I would add, I wonder about the situation where the patient has their own genie. Because, patients, do they really take accountability for the fact that it's actually their body that's being managed, treated, dealt with, whatever? Maybe not. We delegate that. We accept the physician is doing the right thing, but we all know that physicians and other healthcare professionals are imperfect and make mistakes. So, I'm kind of interested in what happens if the patient has a genie.
Or maybe just as us patients not asking the right questions. Maybe this genie says,
because the genie
Mihaela,
steps in
recall to
and
ask
says,
this
what
question.
about this? The number of, it's a small example in many ways, but drug-drug interactions. I'm a clinical pharmacologist, so of course I'm thinking about drug-drug interactions. I mean, so many times it's just we forget to ask, what treatment are you on? My sister called me about something a week or so ago, and I forgot to ask her. Just remind me what treatment you're taking. And when she came back to me 20 minutes later and says, I've just talked to my husband, and he says, could it be this drug? Oh shit, absolutely it could. So we're imperfect, but here's an empowered patient. So I see interesting possibilities there. Let's jump to the clinical trials piece. I haven't thought about this in great detail, but I can immediately see, I'm thinking about the genies at the moment, it's mostly how can we do better the things we're trying to do now. I've not yet got to thinking about, are there things that we can't even do today that we might be able to in the future? So there may be bits there that I'm not imagining, but can we do better what we're trying to do now? One of the huge problems in clinical trials is finding the patients. Patients getting the ability to take part in trials. I can certainly see that being substantially streamlined. I can also see big opportunities for the within trial monitoring, in particular, perhaps, as some of the more adverse events, the Genie, again, the patient Genie now, tracking how that individual patient is changing, what's going on, and helping them to recognize when they may be getting an adverse effect, for example, and picking that up earlier. So, and I'm sure there will be a lot of other opportunities within the whole trial design area and understanding, well, which trial should we actually be doing. Whilst I'm talking about clinical trials, again, to build on something Owen said, I think at the moment there's little, I would say, demonstrating the value of a Genie will have to be done within the context of clinical trials. You'll have to do a clinical trial to show that clinician plus Genie leads to better outcomes than physician alone. So there will need to be trials that actually
Richard,
test.
do you, sorry to push back, do you, if I'm not a clinician, but let's assume I'm a patient. Let's assume I'm a patient. I can bring my Genie with me, whether you like it or not, if I think it's beneficial to me.
That will be one
Am
of the
I right?
challenges
Am
within
I
the
right?
trial.
I don't know.
So I'm thinking about physician plus physician Genie and access to all the other physician healthcare system-based Genies. But I agree with you. I think actually one of the challenges within the clinical trial might be that your control group might also be empowered by Genies because they're bringing their own Genies with them. I mean, these are challenges we have within some clinical trials today with different contexts. But I think we will need to recognize that establishing the evidence base will still need to do clinical trials. Now, lastly, and I'm conscious of time, I mean, in terms of how we actually use drugs, I mean, Mihaela, my huge interest is in better individualizing therapy. I'm old enough to remember the pre-evidence-based medicine world where choice of treatment often depended upon the biases of individual physicians and other healthcare professionals. And we sort of moved significantly away from that with evidence-based medicine to a much more protocol-driven approach, a much more standardized approach, but one that is based on population data. And what I hope we move to more in the future is one where, in a data-driven way, the healthcare professional can make their choices about patient management, whether it's drugs, non-drug therapy, surgery, whatever, all the different potential modalities of treatment. And they can understand in a data-driven way how to adapt the population model, if you like, for that individual. Actually,
on that note, could I again jump, Richard? Sorry, I'm curious. So if somebody has a rare disease or a disease that's less well understood, potentially such a Genie of that clinician could reach out to Genies of other clinicians in that area to see if a patient of this type has been seen before and how they reacted. Could that be a use potentially?
Absolutely. I can absolutely see the patients like me, but I can also see, you're just a bit different. You might actually respond better to treatment A than treatment B. I mean, you can see machine learning driven articles at the moment starting to come out, showing that, how different patients can be pushed, maybe better on treatment A or rather than treatment B, and others are better on treatment B than treatment A and so on. But trying to assimilate all this data for the individual clinician, I think, is going to be quite challenging, and I can certainly see the Genies helping there. And again, will it be the patient's Genie or the physician's Genie, or both? And I suspect a bit of both. There are many other things I could say, but I'm conscious we should give some time to the audience as well. And many of the questions have come because I've not been reading through those. So I'm going to stop, and we may have a chance to tackle some of the questions from the audience.
Thank you. That was great. And you also touched on some subjects that the audience also asked. But maybe let's go to the first one by Johannes, who got a lot of upvotes. Maybe Johannes, you can unmute yourself and then you can ask your question live and direct it to the panelists you wanted answered.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right, so my question would be, I find very inspiring this concepts of genies, but a recent study has also already in the title that large language model lack essential metacognition for reliable medical reasoning. And I'm especially interested in this metacognitive capabilities that I think are required for such a genie and that are substantially required for such a genie. And shouldn't we focus on more task-oriented agents that require less metacognition capabilities? Or in other words, what makes you think that we, with the current technology, would even get there to have systems with such strong metacognitive abilities that they would actually work? Because I think, yeah, looking at the current technology or the technology we are focusing on here, they may be so limited that we won't get there, and then we shouldn't try, or we should use other technology. Sorry.
Thanks a lot, Johannes. I guess this question is for me because I'm putting forward this kind of next generation, and you'll say, well, we are not even there, and why do we think about the next generation? Well, LLM agents are already starting to become more and more pervasive. We are improving the reasoning abilities. We are not there yet, but we are moving at fast pace. The reason I bring this agenda is not because we are there. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Genie document that I put forward, which is aimed actually not for the clinical community, but for the machine learning community, I present 101, but the reality is there were more, and I curated them to be just 101 questions that we need to answer to be able to get to Genies. And as I mentioned, every question alone may take a PhD thesis in computer science. But the reason I think we need to think as a community, from a machine learning point of view, we clearly need to think about questions such as this if we want to evolve the current state of AI. But why should the clinical community think about that in my perspective is we need to steer the development in the right way. So, like you rightly say, it may take quite some time to build technology that is useful. And if we let the geeks like me build such technology, we may build technology that's not directly useful and not directly empowering. So part of the reason to start this conversation early is to envision what this future would look like, what the requirements for this technology are, and kind of mandate the machine learning community to build the capabilities that are especially useful from the onset. So this is point one. Point two, I'm afraid that if we don't steer the thinking, we may build such technology that's not empowering, but rather is useless. So this is why we are not there yet, but I think it's already time to be steering the conversation to the next level and envision this future. Otherwise, we will not get in the right direction.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then I would also like to take another question from the audience by somebody who is also known to our Revolutionizing Healthcare session itself, Olivier Elemento, who asked two questions in the chat, but maybe I'll invite you to ask it live as well. Welcome back, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed this discussion and the talk. Thank you, guys. I guess I have two questions. One of them is how do we benchmark these agent systems? Part of the challenge is that, there's a lot of data that goes into existing LLMs and are being used as part of these agents. So how do you create benchmarks that you can use to really, objectively assess the accuracy, but also the utility of these agents? I guess my second connected question is that I guess part of the benchmarking should include existing LLMs like Gemini 2.5 and Sonnet 2.7 because they are becoming quite incredible and amazing at a range of tasks. They can plan and reason and simulate interactions. They can write code, so on. So, what's the secret sauce for making this kind of multi-agent system better than these increasingly sophisticated tools?
Thank you, Olivier, for coming back and asking these two thought-provoking questions. So the first one, I really feel that this idea of personalized genies is important. So I I, as an individual, may want to train my own Genie. This is mine. It's based on my data, my way of thinking, my IP, if you like. I may not want to share it with others. So I envision a future. Right now, we have these ideas where, if you like, certain companies, for better or worse, scrape all the data, scrape all the know-how, and they're in the position of power. Here I'm putting, if you like, a counterforce. I'm saying, no, 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 you cannot have access to my data. This Genie will brainstorm with me. This Genie will have certain protections about my knowledge and my know-how and my data, not going to the outside. I can decide with whom this Genie exchanges and what information and what knowledge. So I view these Genies much more as being ours, being blending with us, empowering us, and not necessarily empowering the big large language models of the world that are owned by certain companies. So that's number one. In terms of benchmarking their ability, well, if it's useful to me, if I find it useful as an individual, if it empowers me, I would say feedback will be very important. I also feel that we need to envision this communication between human and their own Genie. We have different styles, different likes and dislikes, and I think that from a technology point of view, we need to build the right way of communication such that we can give the right feedback, the right steering. We know that we like certain students more or less, we like certain coaches more or less. In the same way, our own style may need to be developed in building these Genies. And a related question, but maybe more geeky one, is if the Genies themselves should talk human speech, which is transparent, has an advantage, but there's also a disadvantage. Human speech may be redundant and sequential rather than parallel. Should the Genie speak Genie talk, a new language which is more effective, maybe more robust, more quantitative, or not? Should they talk symbolic language? These are questions that will need to be answered. With respect to where we are today with the state-of-the-art, let's say, large language models, I feel still we are quite far away from a process of creativity, truly long-term planning, where we are not planning just next code, but rather, or next task, but rather really within months and maybe even years. And also, last but not least, we know that the trustworthiness, as many of you have pointed out, of these models is still not great. So I think there is a lot to be done from a machine learning point of view, again, to go to the next level. But one more time, I want to reiterate, I feel that we need to think about what we want, both in terms of capabilities as well as in terms of robustness and regulation. And this is why I thought it's the right time to start the conversation, even though Genies are not with us yet.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but I think there has to be some kind of guarantee of performance, right? Because you know how it works, right? Somebody tries something and it doesn't work well, and then they'll never try it again if it improves. So there has to be a way to kind of say, like, when starting this piece of software, there's a guarantee of performance. If the data that you ingest into it is not good enough, I'll tell you. But it has to be kind of like a minimum level of performance is guaranteed. Otherwise, people are gonna get frustrated most likely, and may not adopt the framework as quickly as we would like.
Completely.
I'll maybe ask David Rifkin, excuse me if I'm butchering your name, because you were also talking about end-to-end testing. If you could add, or if something was answered already.
Sure, I could go on a very long time on this because this is very parallel to what I'm actually researching right now. I'm actually working with Eric Broda, who's developed the agentic mesh, which sounds like a lot of the core technology of what this would do, right? He's got a system that basically plans everything, and you've got a collection of different agents that are specialized in doing different tasks. So it sounds very, very similar. And we're looking at it like to actually implement within the next year at UHG. So we're not talking about way off in the future. We're talking about pretty soon. The problem is from the governance, the testing perspective. Right now, our model is to be end-to-end testing, and that would be completely impossible to do for a system that sophisticated. There's just too many tests. It would take until the end of time to, have the testing done, and then what's the point of having it, right? So we are looking at things like the individual agents being tested and validated and approved. The complexity becomes in when you have them talking to each other, what happens, what data is understood and what is not understood. So that's where my particular research right now centers around that kind of dynamic aspect and how do we actually test that. And very much, I'm trying to fall back to the clinical trial kind of model that's been mentioned by a lot of people. But even then, it's how do you get enough permutations of everything that you would want? So one of the things that we're looking at UHG is very much keeping the focus of any particular system, the entire system, very, very narrow. So if it's radiology in a specific area, and you'll have many different ones, and each one goes through its own separate approval process. So it is quite cumbersome, involved, etc. If I can take a step back for a second, one of the big problems with systems that have like a conversational input, right? So not a pure agent that's completely autonomous, that's just doing summarizations of documents that gets faxed or something, but actually interactive, is that people they have this what we call the technology bias, right? They think that whatever answer technology gives them is correct. And we are seeing in little results, because this is what I do day in, day out. So I see all these results from all the tests, and we're seeing sometimes it works really, really well, right? It can really help the clinicians. The clinicians are like going, hey, this is great. This is, I hadn't actually thought of it. Yes, this was exactly the right thing. Or I think somebody else mentioned about, hey, I forgot to ask that question. It helps them ask the questions. Great. But unfortunately, the majority of the time, about 60 to 70% of the time, we're still seeing that it is not getting the right answers. The clinicians are going, yeah, it got this wrong. It hallucinated this, and it missed a key bit of information. It may have even forgotten to include a drug that a person's on. And there's billions of examples. And the biggest one that we have a hard time with LLMs right now is the comprehension of time. It doesn't understand time. It doesn't understand that there's a sequence of events in a human's life. They may have had a diagnosis, and maybe the diagnosis was incorrect, right? And we've got a correction for that now at a later date. It doesn't understand that. It doesn't understand that someone changed dosage of a drug that they were on. So it gets the wrong dosage in its process. So there's a lot of these challenges that, yes, over time we will improve these. That's true when we're talking about general purpose,
Sorry, David.
GPT-4, for example.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but
Oh,
I
sure.
think we really need to wrap up the session
Okay, sure.
soon.
So yeah, so it's just there's a lot of work still to be done, but the core technology is there. So we can start maybe testing it out on some other things.
Thank you. No, really interesting points. Thank you. They're well taken. I think we would like to hand over to our panelists for one final brief statement before we wrap up. Owen, is there any last thought you would like to share?
Just one, which is that for me, agents and genies should not be about giving us the right answer. They should be about helping us to think, and those two things are very different.
I was going to say something very similar, Owen, so thank you. You put it better than I would have done. And Mihaela, let's let you finish.
My final comment is let's keep thinking about this technology such that if it is to build technology, we build some useful technology. So thank you for all the comments.
Yeah, thank you so much for the great panel and for the presentation and also for all your great questions. Next up's going to be two sessions in the next coming months. The first one's going to be on 6th of May, and it's going to be on AI for diabetes prevention and care. And then in June, we're going to have a more personal session, quite an exciting one, where we're going to share a couple of the experience we had as clinicians in an AI lab and how we see how much the two worlds really differ. And then last but not least, we would like to remind you about the summer school. Do sign up if you want to learn more about machine learning, get your hands on some of the co-pilots that the lab has been developing. And yeah, sign up for that for more information on AI and machine learning in medicine. Thank you so much for being here today. We hope to see you again in the next session, and thanks again to our great panel for being here.